to the next item. It is Council Bill 851. Councilmember Black, would you please put Council Bill 851 on the floor for publishing?
Yes, I move that Council Bill 20-0851 be ordered published.
Thank you. It has been moved and
Second.
Get a second. All right, we've got the second. Comments by members of council on Bill 851. Councilmember Herndon.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill has been brought up in the public comment, but I'll just reiterate what it is. It is sending to the voters a question in regards to, it mentions conservation easements, but it actually is specific to the Park Hill Golf Course, where if there's any changes on the Park Hill Golf Course, needs to go to a vote of the people versus going through what I believe are the normal channels of the planning process. So what I'd like to take a moment and share with my colleagues 5 reasons why I believe that this is not the bill to send forward to the voters, and I would ask for them to vote no, with it being the least important, the first one, and the most important as I go towards the end. The first one I talk about is there really is no rush to bring this forward right now. I've been dealing with the Park Hill Golf Course since I believe 2017, when the previous property owner was having community conversations about what to do with this land should it not become a golf course. And recently, when I've heard the proponents of this have had conversations as if there is something imminent going to happen. And that just isn't the case. There are 2 things that were preventing immediate development on the land. One is the conservation easement, which, as all of our colleagues know, we are the deciders of whether or not to lift it. So there wouldn't be any changes, one, unless City Council decided to lift the conservation easement. And then 2 deals with the zoning. The land is zoned OSB, open space recreational. And as City Council, we are the determiners of land use. And so any rezoning requires an extensive process of deciding what should happen on that land. So there really isn't a rush to move forward with this vote right now. Second one deals with the ballot question. And I have the language in front of me, and the way that it reads: shall the charter of the City and County of Denver be amended to prohibit the following without the approval of the voters in a regularly scheduled municipal or special election? And then there's the first bullet. Any commercial or residential development on land protected by a city-owned conservation easement, except where consistent with conservation easement purposes, and then there's a second bullet, any partial or complete cancellation of a city-owned conservation easement unless for the purpose of creating a new park. So when we refer charter measures, it should make the single subject criteria. I don't believe this does, because it's an and. What if you agree with the first bullet, but you don't agree with the second? How is a voter to determine which way that they should vote? And I think that that doesn't solve that issue, and that would be a second reason. But as I said, the first 2 are reasons that I just have concerns, but they're not the most important. And let me get into some that really mean the most to me. And I appreciate Penfield Tate bringing up the Charter Review Committee about this, because that was several months ago, and that was the last time there was a public conversation about the Park Hill Golf Course. And I meant to look it up, and I apologize. I don't know if Councilwoman Ortega, as she chairs the Charter Review Committee, remember where that was, but that was it. Since then, there have been no public conversations about the Park Hill Golf Course in front of this body. If we are going to send something to the voters, I believe that there should be a thorough and transparent process where we have the time to ask the questions about, does this meet the single subject threshold? That we have questions about the conservation easement, that we have opportunity to digest, is this the appropriate time to do it? And we have not been afforded this opportunity. Any other charter change that has gone forward through the City Council has gone through the process of ensuring that we go to FinGov, we have opportunity to hear community input multiple times, and we haven't had the ability to do that with this particular measure. My 4th measure deals with community outreach. So I want to remind people, the Park Hill Golf Course is in Council District 8, and I've been dealing with this for several years. When I first learned that this was going to come to the Charter Review Committee, I made 3 phone calls because I was unaware. I reached out to the president of the Northeast Park Hill Coalition. I reached out to the executive director of the Park Hill Collective Impact. And then I reached out to a faith leader whose house of worship is just south of the Park Hill Golf Course. None of them knew that that was coming the following week. And so if we're going to send a measure to the voters, there should be extensive community outreach. And I am in no way applying that these are only the community members that should weigh in on this. But if we have these 3, and for the record, council members, you should have received emails from all of them sharing their concerns about that. The most recent being Evelyn Barnes, the president of Northeast Park Hill, in her capacity as just as a constituent, not as a president of the registered neighborhood organization, but expressing concern that there hasn't been the effective community outreach that it should be. Because if we're going to move forward with this, particularly since this is in Northeast Park Hill, where are the individuals that in Northeast Park Hill that support it? Because they will be the most impacted by moving this forward. And my last challenge that I have with this deals with the precedent that we are setting. There is not another issue that I'm aware of where we are taking something that affects one particular neighborhood and sending it to the vote of the people. We're doing the East Area Plan, East Central Plan. None of those proposals are going to a vote of the people. Councilwoman Sandoval, she's going through the process right now of renaming a park in her district. That's not going to a vote of the people. So for us to turn around and say, we are going to change policy and let a particular community, an African-American historical community that we know has been underserved for too long, they have the opportunity to move forward and decide through our large development review process that the city is going to undertake, as well as any rezoning process. That community should decide what happens with that. And I also want to acknowledge the communities just adjacent to that on the west side of Colorado as well. But when you're receiving the emails that I've received, when it comes to individuals that support this, I notice overwhelmingly those that are in support do not live in Northeast Park Hill. And the interesting bit is when I've read some of these emails, the individuals that are writing to support the vote, no one even mentions Northeast Park Hill. Not even acknowledging that this vote, if we were to support it, is going to dilute the voice of the African-American community in Northeast Park Hill. I think that should be troubling to everybody that can't even acknowledge that. And in the few days that we've had, I hope that colleagues have had the chance to read the numerous emails that we've got from individuals in Northeast Park Hill, whether they be business owners, residents, property owners just to the north, that have said continually, this is not appropriate at this time. And we're creating a precedent where we're going to say, no longer are we going to go through our normal planning process. So those are my reasons. I believe that this is not ready to go to the vote of the people. And I do want to acknowledge too that Penfield mentioned Greater Park Hill. Northeast Park Hill Coalition is the registered neighborhood organization where the Park Hill Golf Course mentions. Penfield Tate did mention the survey done by Greater Park Hill, but he didn't mention that the majority of the people who participated in that survey were white and not a reflection of Northeast Park Hill. So to say that the data from that survey demonstrates what the Northeast Park Hill community wants, I believe is inaccurate. I want Northeast Park Hill to determine what happens to that park. And if they were to say, I want 155 acres of open space, rest assured, I will be their biggest champion for that. And if they say they want something else through our extensive community planning process, I will continue to be their biggest champion for that. So I'd ask my colleagues to vote no. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. John McGrath is in the attendees. Could he be promoted up to panelist? I just wanted to ask him a question about the easement itself, because this has been a point of purposeful confusion as to whether the easement requires that the golf course use be the primary use in perpetuity, and whether to change that and to make it anything else would require an amendment to the easement. Is John there yet?
Yep, we got John up.
John, tell us how the claim from proponents of this initiative that the easement doesn't require that the site remain a regulation 18-hole golf course, but that the overarching open space preservation can somehow override the specific literal use that's spelled out in 6 places in the easement, that it must be a golf course, and prohibits anything that prevents it from being a golf course from being done there. Explain how that is legally an incorrect interpretation.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Flynn. John McGrath, as Denver City Attorney's Office.
And that was a leading question, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. But I have read, excuse me, I have read the easement a number of times with and tried to remain objective about the interpretation that's been offered, that somehow this easement gives to the city the authority to impose a generalized open space use limitation on the property, as opposed to the golf course affirmative obligation to operate a golf course and the limitations around that use contained in the document. You're correct that there are a number of very specific detailed provisions about both affirmatively what can and should be done on the property and what can't be done, all of which to me leads to the inescapable conclusion that golf is the beyond primary. It's really the exclusive use of the property. There are incidental uses that would be permitted, but no use that would prohibit the use as a golf course. So I'd say that the legal canon applicable to this is that, as you pointed out, that general statements of intent or background or context in a document do not govern over the specific detailed requirements that are in the same document. So that's a very well recognized principle.
Thank you. So in other words, were this initiative to pass, it would require a vote of the people citywide, even to cease using it as a golf course and use it for something else.
Yes, I mean, it would. And if the city were to purport to require the owners of the property to use it for something other than a golf course, we really don't have the ability to do that without an agreement of that owner.
Well, that too, obviously, but we would need, under this, we would need to go to a citywide vote of the people to stop playing golf there.
Correct. I think that would
not
be.
Not that I play golf anyway. Thank you. Madam President, Stephanie Syner is in the audience. Could she be elevated? She is a resident of Northeast Park Hill and wrote to us recently about the lack of engagement of the Black community in Northeast Park Hill to the benefit basically of the white folks who've been reaching out to us on this. And I wanted to ask her to explain or to expound a little bit on what she wrote to us so the public can hear this. Stephanie, are you there?
Mm-hmm. We've got her promoted here. We'll just get her unmuted.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, it's Stephanie Syner. I live in Northeast Park Hill. I did submit a letter to Denver City Council today with concern for myself and my elderly neighbors who surround me in the community. I've lived in Northeast Park Hill for 10 years. And I think our biggest concern is that we feel like we haven't been at the table for so many years. They feel like North and South Park Hill have kind of always been our speaking voice. And I think the frustration in this process really has just elevated that conversation to say, you know, we really want to have an opinion. We want to have a voice. We want to decide, as Councilman Herndon mentioned, we want to decide what our neighborhood should get, what benefits we want, and go through a planning process. We don't want to be told what is going to go there based on what the charter change would say. Nobody has come to us, asked our opinion. We have not been able to voice our concerns or even be any part of the process. I did poll my neighbors just to make sure again, and they were unaware that this conversation was even happening. So I think it's just a concern that we feel like we're being left out. We want a fair process. And having been a part of City Council for many years, I know that we can do better, not just for me and my neighbors, but for Northeast Park Hill as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Madam President, I'll make my comments now then. First, we need to be absolutely clear about something here. There's absolutely zero risk to the conservation easement at this point. There is no one on this council or in the city who's even thinking of proposing that it be eliminated. There's no urgency to this matter that justifies the last-minute nature with which this was brought forward after ensuring that it would have no transparency because it was twice scheduled for have public comment in FinGov committee, but was pulled off the agenda at the last minute. So consistent with the actions we took last week on the other charter proposals that did not engage the public or the council through committee, we should send this for the first time to committee and possible referral to the ballot at an election next year. That allows full transparency and engagement that this frankly has lacked. Secondly, the initiative is very poorly written and has damaging unintended consequences. Primarily, it works against the sponsor's declared intent because it would require a citywide vote, as we just heard, even to let it not be a golf course anymore. And make no mistake, the easement is clear in 6 specific sections that it must be a private regulation 18-hole golf course, and by its own specific terms, it prohibits allowing any other use that would interfere with the continued existence of a golf course. That's thank you to Councilwoman Kathy Reynolds back in 1997, who was a golfer and lived in Park Hill. Any claims to the contrary, that it doesn't have to be a golf course, are legally and just factually wrong. Right now, under the easement, if there were community consensus that another recreational use is preferable, we could alter that easement to allow that recreational use. But under this initiative, it would require a citywide vote merely to allow the golf course to change to something else. Finally, the charter amendment leaves as one course of action that the easement can be removed only for the purpose of the city buying it and making the whole 155 acres a dedicated city park. The cost of that one transaction would eat up the entire park's acquisition resources, probably more than an annual amount, to the detriment of all the other districts that are severely underparked, especially in Southwest Denver. But primarily, I want to talk about something that was very important to us just a couple of weeks ago, and that's the discussion over race and social equity. At our retreat, when we listened to Dr. Anita Mosby-Tyler, the very first question we learned we're supposed to be asking right now is, who is at the table? And are the communities of color that have been historically marginalized at the table? Over the past 2 weeks, council members have been receiving emails from people urging us to put this on the ballot. So on Saturday, I took those 69 emails that I had received, and I was able to positively identify all but 2 of them by their race or ethnicity. Of those 67 individuals, 3 are Black. They live in Congress Park, Clayton, and North Park Hill. None lived in Northeast Park Hill, where the golf course is located. 2 of them are Latino. They live in Sunnyside and City Park West. The other 62 individuals are white. 5 live in Country Club, 4 live in Capitol Hill, 3 live in Congress Park, and 2 each in Cheeseman Park, Hilltop, Welsher, Windsor, and 2 in City Park in the 20th floor penthouse overlooking City Park. Others are scattered around the other neighborhoods. Some were from Westminster, Boulder, and 1 from unincorporated Adams County. There was only 1 person for whom I could not confirm a physical address. Their median age was 70. Only 7 of the emails came from residents of Northeast Park Hill, and they all had something in common. All of them were white, and all of them happened to currently reside on land that itself used to be part of the Park Hill Golf Course. 4 of them live in a development called the Overlook in the southeast corner of what used to be George Clayton's land, and it has an interesting history. In 1997, when Denver was negotiating over this easement with Clayton Trust, the trustees carved out that 14 to 15 acres and they kept it out of the easement. 4 years afterward, in 2001, after we protected the 155 acres, Clayton Trust sold that land to KB Homes. And now the people who already live on the former golf course property are asking us not to let anyone else do so. The other 3 Northeast Park Hill residents who emailed also have something in common. They are all white, and they live in Park Hill Village condos on the northwest corner. That parcel had a different history. Originally part of the golf course, Mayor Bill McNichols sold it to the federal government in the 1970s when the city was acting as a trustee under Clayton's will. They sold it to be the site for a new U.S. Denver Mint. The Treasury Department wanted to get out of downtown and expand, and we were fearful that they move out of the city, so we sold it to them. Later, they changed their mind and they began expanding the downtown Mint, and the Park Hill site became surplus federal property. They auctioned it off for the development we see today, which started in 2004. One more observation on the vote of the Greater Park Hill Community RNO that supports this initiative. Once again, 16 board members voted. 14 of them are white, 2 were Black. Not a single one of them lives in Northeast Park Hill. Most of them live in South Park Hill between Colfax and 23rd Avenue. One of the 2 Black board members opposed this resolution, and that was Lamone Knowles, who represents the RNO's district that includes the golf course. So here we are a few weeks after our retreat and agreeing that a race and social equity lens should be front and center, being asked to continue to marginalize the Black community around the golf course and agree with the demands of a predominantly white, privileged, and entitled constituency, nearly all of whom live elsewhere. And they ask us to put in a city charter a requirement that even if the Black community reaches a consensus that they'd like a grocery store in their food desert here at this site, or some affordable housing, maybe all surrounding a large regional park, that every voter in the city gets to decide whether they can have that in their neighborhood. my voters in Marston, Bear Valley, Fort Logan, voters in Southmore, Berkeley, Sloan's Lake, they will all have more clout than the Black community there as to what will happen in their neighborhood. And it's not just that the Black community there hasn't had a seat at the table. We're being asked to remove the table itself. So for that, for those reasons, Madam President, I'd like to see us refer this to a committee. I wouldn't say re-refer because it's never been to FinGov in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Are you looking to officially make that motion right now, or I've got quite a few hands raised in the queue? Would you like me to go to them first? It's your choice.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Councilmember Hinds.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe there's Owen Perkins in the audience. If he would be willing to raise his hand, I'd like to ask him a couple of questions about the Democratic Party resolution.
All right, sounds good.
Oh, there he is. He's already
there we go.
Mr. Perkins, thank you for your interest, and thank you for being willing to speak with us tonight. I asked you a couple questions over email today, and then I saw that you were in the audience, and so I wanted to ask you again about the resolution that the Democratic Party of Denver voted on. And the one question that I asked earlier today was that the resolution that the Democratic Party of Denver adopted, I think it was adopted by greater than 90% of the vote, but it appears to not correspond with Council Bill 20-0851. Can you talk about the timing of the resolution from the Democratic Party of Denver and Bill 20-0851?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay. That resolution was passed earlier this year in January, and the charter amendment had not been proposed at that point. So this was a very closely related resolution, but not directly endorsing the charter amendment because that did not exist at that time. The Central Committee for the Democratic Party of Denver meets twice a year, and their next meeting following that January 25th meeting is this coming Saturday. So they have not had a chance to meet and weigh in on it since it was introduced as a charter amendment. But it's very similar issue, obviously, and I shared that resolution, as I believe the party did back in January, just to make sure council members had those ideas in their mind, saw where the platform stood on issues of open space and preservation. But yeah, it is not directly related to a charter amendment that didn't exist at the time that the resolution was passed.
Understood. Thank you. And if I were to look at the resolution itself, I agree with a lot of this. Good thing I'm a member of the Central Committee. I'm a strong Democrat too. I agree with a lot of the information in the resolution. The resolution is, be it resolved that we, the Central Committee of the Democratic Party of Denver, call for Denver City Council's continued protection of the perpetual open space conservation easement for the Park Hill Golf Course and oppose any effort to remove the conservation easement from the land. But that's not what is under consideration in 0851. Is that correct?
I believe that's probably correct. Yeah. And as
Okay.
I said, it was written before this charter amendment.
Fair enough. And then the one other question that I have for you, and again, thank you for your willingness to answer questions. Was this on the agenda in the last Central Committee meeting, or was this brought forward by a member of the Central Committee without it necessarily being on the agenda? I'm sorry, specifically the resolution that the Democratic Party of Denver Central Committee voted on.
Well, my memory may not be clear on it, but I believe it was on the agenda. I believe it was circulated with the call, the resolution, so everybody saw it 10 days in advance or more, but I believe it went out with the call and was on the agenda. That said, it also was introduced by Central Committee members, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perkins. Thank you, Madam President. We've got several people who have their hands raised, so I will reserve my comments for later.
All right, thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman CdeBaca.
I just wanted to let you know that that Penfield Tate is on the line. If you need to promote him, I will let everybody else make their comments, and then at the end, I'll bring him back up.
Okay, sounds good. We'll make sure we've got Penfield up in the panelists. Councilwoman Torres.
Thank you, Madam President. My questions, I think, are for John McGrath. If you can come back on real quick. Hi, John.
Hello.
So we're in a 3-year kind of no action period. Is that right? Am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to, Councilwoman, is the settlement agreement that we entered into with Westside, which is the owner of the property. We agreed at the time that we settled the condemnation action and the litigation that was pending concerning that property, that the city would forbear from strictly enforcing the covenant to restore the golf course for a period of 3 years. It's temporary forbearance, which we agreed to as part of that settlement.
So at the end of that forbearance period, if nothing changes, Westside must return the space to an 18-hole golf course. Is that right?
Correct.
The changes that would have to happen for that not to occur would require 2 votes from us, right? A vote to lift the easement or amend it, and then a vote to rezone, at least 2 changes, but then a vote to rezone property there because it's currently open space, right?
Correct. Yes, 2 votes would be the minimum amount required to make that change.
Adding this, if it were to pass at the ballot in November, we still have to take those 2 votes. That doesn't change, right?
Yes, as I read the proposed charter amendment, whatever it is we would be taking to the voters pursuant to the language of that amendment would need to be defined in some way. And I think that that would require that the process be complied with, that we know exactly what type of residential or commercial development was being proposed in order to give meaning to the effect to present it to the voters for a vote.
I think that's where I'm still unsure on this, and it didn't occur to me until today that I don't know when a vote of the people would take place. At what point in our council or even in the neighborhood decision-making process, when is it determined that now is the point at which we have to take this to a vote of the people? Is it before or after we've voted as a body to lift or amend the conservation easement?
Well, I guess I'll confess that I'm not sure that the proposed language is crystal clear, but the restriction which triggers the requirement for a vote under the proposed charter amendment hinges on residential or commercial development. So obviously with the zoning, the current zoning and the restrictions in the easement, I don't think that you would be going to a vote of the people before you, like I said, had some definition of what the proposed residential or commercial use was going to be. So I would assume that the vote would have to come after those other city council actions.
And okay, after the 2 actions. Okay. Thank you, John. I think those are all the questions I had.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. And Councilman Flynn, I see you're back up in the queue, but I'm going to go ahead and go to Councilwoman Sandoval and then Councilwoman Ortega, since you haven't spoken yet. Councilwoman Sandoval?
Thank you, Madam President. So my questions are to the city attorney. John, can you come back up? So my first question was similar to the line of questioning that Councilwoman Torres has of why it currently isn't a regular 18-hole golf course. And I forgot about the no action period. So if this ballot measure passes in November, does that prohibit, so if we push this to the voters and they vote in favor of it, does this ballot measure prohibit the land returning to a golf course after the no action period?
That's a good question, frankly. I hadn't considered it. I think that the proponents would argue that it wouldn't prohibit uses consistent with what the underlying conservation easement currently permits. So I would assume that restoration to a golf course use consistent with the terms of the easement would be permitted without a vote. I think that that's the likely interpretation there.
Okay, and then thank you for that question. And then answer, sorry. And then another question, does this ballot measure prohibit a planning process from taking place? So currently we have a no action period. And in the city and county of Denver, we have a large development review process. And to Councilman Herndon's point, we have neighborhood planning processes. So would this ballot measure prohibit any planning process from taking place on this parcel if it were to go to the vote of the people and pass?
Right. So if enacted, I guess I would say that my, again, best interpretation here, there's a lot of unknowns as to how this might be interpreted and enforced under any given set of circumstances. So this is my best hypothetical, which is always risky for a lawyer to do. But I would say that it does not on its face prohibit a planning process. And as I said before, I think it almost requires a planning process in order to define this residential or commercial use that the voters would be asked to approve.
Okay, and then one last question, Madam President. Thank you for allowing me. One more question, John. Can you talk to us about, can you refresh everyone's history who's watching? How did the city and county of Denver become involved in this parcel? What monies from the city and county of Denver, from taxpayers, were used to obtain this parcel of land?
Well, if you're referring to the conservation easement specifically, correct. Yeah, it was, these were funds that were set aside and identified in, I think, a 1989 bond issuance that was approved. And what was described in the bond documents was that these funds were to be used to acquire the Park Hill Golf Course. It turned out that the amount of money set aside, $2 million, was not enough to convince the owners to sell it. So we ended up acquiring this conservation easement.
So can you say that one more time? So a vote of the people. So this parcel has already gone to the vote of the people. And in that geo bond question, it said that we set aside money to purchase it, but we didn't have enough money to purchase the land. So we purchased this easement on it. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval. Councilwoman Ortega.
Mute myself. Okay. Can you hear me? If you can stay on, my questions are for you as well. Appreciate you being available. So, well, someone that spoke earlier raised questions about the single subject rule. Can you speak to whether or not this particular language meets the single subject rule placed on the ballot?
I think I'm going to need to defer. That's not really my area of expertise. I think that either Kirsten Crawford or John Griffith can probably respond to that question.
So I would appreciate one of them to be able to address this question. I'm assuming somebody in the city attorney's office has looked at that issue pretty carefully.
We have Kirsten Crawford. There we go.
Kirsten.
Hi there. Good evening. Oops. Sorry. I'm in Marquesia, so we're getting feedback here. Kirsten Crawford, Legislative Counsel. We have reviewed the bill and we offered some suggestions to the sponsors. I do think, when a draft comes in, because I just want to kind of level set that this was originally an initiative that went through a review and comment hearing and then became a council member piece of legislation. So we were late in the draft, but I do think that, we're fine on title. You never know what will get challenged, but I think that we have a good defense to that argument.
Okay, so then let me jump back to my other questions with John. You can come back on.
Sure.
So currently, in order for anything to happen with any of our parks that are designated parks, which is a process that is done by city council officially designating them, that requires a vote of the people, correct?
Yes, correct.
So will this be the only park that is not publicly owned that requires a vote of the people?
Well, yes, but I would quibble just with describing this as a park. Remember that the city does not own fee title to this property. We only hold easement.
But our golf courses are considered parkland, right?
Well, they're owned by the city, I think that, and I'm assuming that they are in fact designated parks. So those, yes, the answer is I believe that those are parklands, but again, fee title is owned by the city on those.
Okay, and I want to ask, thank you, John. That's all my questions for you. If the current owner of the property is available, I know, I'm sure they're looking at what action this body is going to take and may be available to weigh in. So do we have someone from the ownership group that can answer a question?
Mm-hmm. We have Kenneth Ho raising his hand, and so we'll get him promoted into the panelists.
Kenneth, we just need you to unmute yourself. Great.
Go ahead, Kenneth.
So I just wanted to ask what the current status is of any planning process that has been underway with the community. I know we had sort of an effort that took place, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago. It's been quite some time, but that was before this particular ownership group was in place. This was when the Clayton Trust was looking at developing the property. And I think they were talking to developers about what that would look like. So since Westside has owned this property, what has been the community engagement?
Sure. Good evening, Councilwoman Ortega and the rest of the members of City Council. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. Kenneth Ho, Westside Investment Properties, 4100 East Mississippi Avenue, Suite 500, Glendale, 80246. Let me start with the second question there, Councilwoman Ortega. The Clayton Early Learning process was a 2-year process that was completed a couple of years ago, you're correct, and produced a document out of that, but that was run by Clayton Early Learning. Since then, we, as Westside, who have owned the property since last July, have not engaged in a formal city planning process. And that is because the first step in that process is a small area plan process. And that is city run. And my understanding, and certainly members of community planning and development should probably opine on this as well, is that they had planned on starting that process in June or July of this year, and then COVID obviously changed those plans. My understanding is that they are still planning on doing that process, I think in the fourth quarter of this year. In the meantime, while I haven't engaged in a formal process because I don't want to preclude that city-led process, I have spoken with hundreds, literally, of neighbors and community members and folks interested in parks and affordable housing and other topics that would be relevant to the eventual planning associated with the golf course, including attending most of the Northeast Park Hill Coalition and Greater Park Hill Community Inc. meetings as well.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions at this time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman Ortega. We're circling back on folks right now, and but we'll go to Councilwoman Kneich since we haven't heard from you yet. Go ahead, Councilwoman Kneich.
Thank you, Madam President. I might live, I'm not sure, closer to this site than maybe any other member of council. I'm certainly close in North Park Hill. And I have been deeply listening and hearing from folks for years now about the site. And I guess what strikes me is how blunt of a tool that a ballot question like this is. Here are the questions that the ballot measure as written is not asking, that we all might be interested in, that I might be interested in. It is not asking whether or not the city should have a conversation with the community about the future of the site. What might a vote of the people say about that? It is not asking what would be the conditions by which the city might entertain a change to the easement or to the size of the parcel that the easement covers, for example. It does not ask whether communities that are nearby who have been historically less likely to participate in government processes like this and less likely to have some of the basic amenities such as grocery stores or other amenities, whether they deserve their voices to be heard in a different way than other issues or concerns, not in exclusion of other issues or concerns, but whether attention needs to be paid. Those questions are really important ones, and the ballot measure doesn't ask those. I recently listened into a hearing that was before another city body, not before our council. And one of the speakers, boiled down this question of equity in this way. She said, the whole point is that because the voice of folks like myself and my family have been least likely to be heard in conversations like this previously, the whole point of equity is that you're supposed to listen harder to these voices, right? So that if we were just interested in majority rule, I'm just going to say we wouldn't necessarily have had the Civil Rights Act, right? Representative, democratically elected officials might have been ahead of public opinion at that point. Certainly on LGBTQ rights, there are moments where ordinances were passed or laws were passed that might not have passed a popular vote, right? Amendment 2 in Colorado was a popular vote. So the question is, sometimes representative democracy and the idea of trying to listen harder to certain voices where there's been exclusion can come up with more just results than a simple majority vote. And so the question I'm faced with right now is whether or not the process being described, a majority vote, is going to get to the most just outcome. And I don't know that it is, because I don't know that we're asking the folks who are voting the right questions, right? If we had asked voters in 1992
whether gay and lesbian people should be able to be in the room when their partner was dying, they might have answered Amendment 2 differently. Might have, if we had asked whether or not they, should be harmed for who they are, we might have gotten different answers. So it really matters what the question we're asking is. And I guess I will just say this. I frankly don't know what should happen on the Park Hill Golf Course. I frankly don't know whether or not a 60-acre park or a 70-acre park is good enough, or whether or not this developer would ever, or any developer, should they sell it, which they have the right to do in our free market system, whether any developer could meet very high community standards for what this site should be, or a portion of this site should be, if the whole thing were not a development. It is quite possible that they have paid too much for the land, that they are unable to meet really high standards for what this should look like. But I do believe that it is my job to listen a little harder to those who've been excluded, not from this ballot measure conversation, but from conversations about the future of their neighborhood. That's the conversation I'm concerned about. And, I am not going to count, I appreciate Councilman Flynn's, observations, but I do think that there are African-American leaders on both sides of this conversation. And I have certainly heard from more who are concerned with this ballot measure than those who are supportive. And those folks maybe are working a little more directly in the community with community voices and representative organizations. So those things do matter, but it frankly isn't just about counting. It's about determining whether or not the right questions have been asked and whether I've been able to listen harder to those who frankly may get drowned out in a citywide vote. So for those reasons, I will not be able to support this moving forward. But in no way, shape, or form does that mean that I think I know at this point what the future of this site should be, or this easement. I think that conversation and the questions I identified are the ones that need to be asked next. And they're hard ones. They may not be answered in a way that changes the outcome of what that site is. But I do believe that we owe it to the folks who live and have tried to engage in this conversation and have been historically excluded from conversations about their neighborhood and the economic needs of their neighborhood are included. So for those reasons, I won't be able to support it going forward. And I also, just one last thing I will say, many times in this job, I wonder about our potential to get beyond all or nothing dichotomies that frankly have more nuanced potential to meet multiple needs. We are underparked in Northeast and North Park Hill. The only park I can go to in my neighborhood is a Denver public school, and it has different rules than parks and different access issues. So we are underparked. And I think I could imagine the powerful coalition we could have if those who vociferously want a huge, massive open space were to listen authentically to those who were interested in economic barriers being solved and uses that they see missing from their neighborhood. And in vice versa, they were to listen to those who are passionate about parks, and that coalition, poor Ken Ho wouldn't stand a chance. Our city would be able to demand the most we could ever, imagine from a community benefits agreement for this site. I hope that no matter how this vote goes tonight, our community might see the potential in being open to engaging beyond our positions into where we might have shared values and shared interests. I know that's it's not really the moment we're living in today. We're living in a moment where every political decision gets posed or all is nothing, but this is not one. You cannot split every baby, but you can split up land. You can split up acreage. You can do creative things, and you could achieve both sets of values on this site. Again, I don't know that we'll get there. It's not something I'll be in control of. I'll continue to listen and try to advocate for all those interests. But I have to put out there that even 9 years into this job, in the most divisive moment I've governed in, I still hang on to just a little hope that people might sit at a table and listen to each other and see how their values put together could amplify both sets. I'm hopeful. I'll be there if I can help. Let me know. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Sawyer, we haven't heard from you yet. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. So I wasn't sure, are we on to comments or are we still in questions?
We are in questions and
Okay.
then, yep, go ahead.
Great. So just a quick one. I have heard that this is the last tract of land of this size in the city and county of Denver. And I wanted to confirm that because I wasn't sure whether that is 100% true or not. So is there someone that can confirm that for us here? Is this the last tract of Denver of this size, in Denver of this size?
Council President Gilmore, this is David Gaspers in Community Planning and Development.
Yeah.
How you doing tonight? Councilwoman Sawyer, I don't know if I can give you an exact answer on that. I believe there are large tracts of land out in the gateway that may be of similar size, and there's always infill potential with other sites that we are unaware of right now. So I don't believe we could give you a definitive answer of this is the last parcel of this size in the city.
Okay, so we are unsure that there is another undeveloped tract of land anywhere in the city and county of Denver at this time.
Well, I would say that there's undeveloped parcels in the gateway, say along Tower Road in District 11. They may not be assembled under the one ownership, but they would be contiguous parcels that equal the same or more acres that are undeveloped.
Okay, and in that tract along that gateway, are those parcels developable, or are those parcels protected land, you know, along the Pena Boulevard corridor?
Sure, there is some protected land. There's a 1,000-foot buffer along Pena Boulevard, but there are other parcels in the gateway that are not under that protection that are developable in that area.
Okay, good to know. Okay, that was my question. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman Sawyer. We're circling back up. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President.
For your patience and allowing us to get through those questions.
Oh, no, I think this discussion demonstrates precisely why my motion that I want to make here to refer this to a committee for further action and for engagement and actual transparency is really needed. The confusion, the unanswered questions, the unintended consequences that we can't resolve here on the floor or even in a public hearing next week are just too great. And so I'd like to make a motion that we refer 20-851 to Land Use Transportation Infrastructure Committee for scheduling and further action and consideration for a future ballot. In the meantime, you need a second first?
Yes, sir. I wanted to just clarify for folks. We currently have Council Bill 851. It's already on the floor for publishing, but you are now making a motion to re-refer it to committee. And so, yes, you're the mover, and I do need a second.
Second.
Okay, Madam President, thank you. And I would say refer it because re-refer implies it's been there before. This discussion, as I said, shows the questions that we're dealing with at the last minute to make a fundamental change in our city charter that has so many problems with the way it's written, with the way it would be carried out. And I want to state right now, there is no way on God's green earth, and I think I said this at one point, the increasingly shrinking green, that I would vote to remove this easement. Right now, I favor keeping this 155-acre golf course and make Andy Klein the world's highest paid caddy for the foreseeable future. That's no never mind to me. I remind folks that I was one of those no votes against the acquisition ordinance that allowed the Platte to Park Hill project on there, and that I voted also no on the fee increases for wastewater that enabled this project in the first place. And it was precisely because of the impact on the golf course. So right now, there's no way that I would vote to remove, and I don't think any of us up here would even consider doing that right now. we're not on the brink of some big, huge change that's going to remove that easement. There's no danger to it, as I think Councilman Hinds brought out in his questioning. So for that reason, Madam President, we should take our relaxed time, discuss this, look at all the ramifications, do it in committee and bring it back and possibly refer it or not at an election after this November. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. Councilman Clark?
Thank you, Madam President. I will disagree with my colleague, Councilman Flynn, in that I do not hope that the future of this piece of land is golf course down the road. That's not what I hope is in the future for us. You know, it's very difficult for me, you know, given my background and where my passion has been. My background is in parks. That's my whole life, my undergraduate degree, all my work prior to city council, and then working to refer the measure that allowed us to have an actual fund to purchase and grow the number of acres of parkland in our city. That's in the fiber of who I am. And so I struggle all the time to not want all of this as a park, not as a golf course, as a publicly accessible open space. But I think a lot of the people who went before me, before the motion, made really good points about this not being something that is in imminent danger or imminent threat. This isn't something that's going to turn into development. There are lots of other checkpoints along the way, and we haven't been able to hear from, we haven't been able to have a robust dialogue. And I guess to that, I think what Councilwoman Kneich said really resonated with, despite the fact of where my heart is, I don't know right now what the right answer for this property is, other than I'm pretty convinced it's not a golf course. But and how much or all of it should be a park. And I think that it's important that we have that planning effort and that community conversation, and that we really lift those voices up as we consider that. And we still hold the power. We've spent a bit of time this year referring things to the ballot, asking our voters to trust us and to give us more authority and more power as a council than we've had in this municipal government before. And this is the opposite. It's taking that power away from us. And I think that is something that we can be good stewards of, and we will be good stewards of. And maybe down the road, this ends up to be the right solution after we've had more of those conversations and we've answered more of those questions. But right now, I guess I'm in that same space of I don't know exactly what the right answer is. And this seems, again, what one of my colleagues said, but too blunt of an instrument. You know, a hammer when we need a scalpel. And so for those reasons, I will be supporting referring this to committee so that we can continue that conversation. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. And just to remind my colleagues, we are in comments on the re-referral and where you are with that. Councilman Hinds?
Thank you, Madam President. I did have comments about the measure itself, but I think some of them are relevant to this as well, to the referral back to committee. I mean, I think it's one thing to think theoretically about an issue, and there's something else, another thing entirely, to research different sides of a boat and have a full discussion about it. And I want to apologize to Councilmember Herndon, because this past weekend, from about Thursday late afternoon to today, I started scrambling around trying to do some detailed research. And I apologize, sir, because I reached into your district and started calling your people. And but it was because I didn't have time. I mean, it's like I had to suddenly make a measured decision. And so I called several people who had reached out to me. There were several calls that I wasn't able to get returned before today, but I wanted to do as much due diligence as I could. And I'm a strong Democrat. Not that this is a partisan seat, but that's part of the reason why I wanted Mr. Perkins, Owen Perkins, to talk about the Democratic Party resolution. We're getting my office, and I'm assuming all the other offices are getting a lot of email. Maybe partly because I'm a strong Democrat, I'm getting a lot of email about the Democratic Party resolution, and people are saying Democrats supported this resolution greater than 90% of the vote, and but as I start digging into the research, just the things over the weekend, I read the resolution, and that isn't what we're voting on, and so I want there to be transparency. I want there to be transparency and accountability, and that's what I said. That's what before I was elected. That's what I said that I would do for my community, and I don't know if I can give that transparency tonight. As one example, the Democratic Party resolution is not talking about what we have here, the issue at hand. I would agree it's similar, but it's not the same. And as Mr. Perkins also agrees, the resolution is not affected by, if this were to be referred to the ballot and voters were to accept or reject it, it would have no impact on the resolution itself. Yet people are equating that resolution to this vote tonight, and that's not transparency. That's frankly, that's the lack of, that's confusion. And we don't have the opportunity between now and the 10 minutes from now or 30 minutes from now, whenever we take that vote, to share with the hundreds of people who voted, who emailed in asking me to vote about this. And so there's a bit of a transparency gap that if we have an open, transparent discussion before we refer it, I think we need to get all the cards on the table and talk about what we're actually voting on and what people think we're voting on and how they are or are not the same. There's also a lot of people, I don't think they're quite overt about it, but they say you'd be racist if you had the whole city vote on what is a neighborhood that is a very diverse community that isn't at all like District 10. District 10 is 82% white, 9% Latino, and the neighborhoods immediately around the golf course are not that. And why should us white folks tell the folks around Park Hill what they could or could not do? Maybe there's a good justification for that. I don't know what that is right now. And so, I mean, there's transparency isn't achieved when the ballot measure. So one other thing I want to say, transparency also not achieved when the ballot measure that is meant to address Park Hill Golf Course doesn't even refer to Park Hill Golf Course. And so, sure, some people are aware that this is intended to affect the one space in the city, which is Park Hill Golf Course. And like even the letter that we received from the greater Park Hill community, the resolution says, vote in favor of this, sending this to the ballot. And they talk about Park Hill Golf Course. The Democratic Party of Denver's resolution talks about Park Hill Golf Course. So they are making the equation, but it doesn't say that in the resolution itself. And I think that that isn't transparent. If we're going to vote on Park Hill Golf Course, let's call a spade a spade. Let's send the ballot question to the voters that it is Park Hill Golf Course. So I would support my colleagues' decision for transparency's sake that we have this this conversation out in the open. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman Hinds. Councilman Kashmann?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. This is truly one of the most interesting discussions I've had since being on council. I see value in the proposal of a vote of the people, and I see the value of leaving it as a decision of City Council. We're always balancing the needs of the immediate neighborhood in zoning issues with citywide needs. If I'm king of the world, which we're all blessed, I am not, there's a whole bunch of this land that becomes a park, if not all of it. I don't, again, my personal preference as I sit here today, I'm not excited about it becoming a golf course. We have other needs. More people should be allowed use of this property than the people who have used it in the past. Planetary needs come into this discussion as we look at the Western United States burning up, which I'm a believer has a lot to do with climate change. And while we have needs for affordable housing, the community may need a grocery store. We need parkland. We need green space, pumping oxygen into the air. I want to talk for a minute about the size of this parcel. My understanding is it's about 155 acres. That's an enormous piece of land. When I start hearing people talking about, well, maybe 70 acres is a park, I've said from the beginning of this discussion that I can see it all being a park, but if there's a valid community discussion, maybe 10 acres. Again, that's me as an individual. I fully support that the voice of the community needs to be heard in this, but I just wanted to be clear, while I'm leaning towards the support of it going back to committee, I'm interested in the discussion of this easement needing to go to a vote of the people, because I'm not convinced of what might come out in the way of a development proposal. So I think more discussion is exactly appropriate, but I have not jettisoned the idea of protections for a conservation easement past leaving it in council's hand. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Black.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd first like to say that I too have been a parks advocate for a very long time. In fact, last year I co-founded the Denver Park Trust, which is raising money for land acquisition for new parks and for capital projects in our most underserved neighborhoods, including some of your districts. I'd like to reiterate some of the comments of my eloquent colleagues. Both council and the Northeast Park Hill neighborhood have been deprived of discussion on this. And as a council, we have all agreed that equity is a priority and bringing the community to the table is a priority. As several of you have said, there is absolutely no danger of anyone on this council terminating the conservation easement. So I would like to be respectful of that community, and let's hear what they'd like to see there. I'm fine having this come to committee for further discussion, but I still wouldn't feel comfortable referring it to the ballot until the Northeast Park Hill neighborhood gets to weigh in on what they would like to see there. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman CdeBaca.
Thank you. Since we're on the motion, is it possible for me to still ask questions or only comment on the motion? Since I skipped thinking that we were gonna be able to get me in there.
You can go ahead and ask whatever questions you might, but the motion is to re-refer.
Got it.
And so if we can keep it to that. So.
Can I get Mr. McGrath back on?
There we go. Go ahead.
So, Mr. McGrath, can you explain to us where the concept of a conservation easement came from?
No, I can't. That's too broad a question, I think. Conservation easements have been around for decades, if not longer. I don't know. I do know that there is a state statute in Colorado that covers conservation easements, and it's been in place for several decades.
Do you know the language in the statewide statute? We only have one conservation easement here in Denver, and it was given its power through our state statute. Do you know the language of that state statute?
Well, I'm familiar with the statute. I don't know each provision of the statute by heart.
Can you tell me if this is correct? Conservation easement in gross means a right in the owner of the easement to prohibit or require a limitation upon a land area owned by the grantor appropriate to the retaining or maintaining of such land, predominantly in a natural, scenic, or open condition, or for wildlife habitat, or for recreational or other use in or condition consistent with the protection of open land, environmental quality, or life-sustaining ecological diversity.
Right, that sounds like probably the definition from the statute.
And so when we have, if there was a challenge brought at the local level, would state statute trump the local definition of a conservation easement?
I think that that question is too vague for me to answer. I mean,
so on our last, there have been a couple of easements in place on this particular property, and the conservation easements changed without council approval. Can you explain how that happened in 2000?
Well, yes. So the original easement that was purchased and paid for by the city was recorded in 1997. In the year 2000, for reasons unrelated to the existence of the conservation easement, the city entered into an agency agreement with Clayton, which was the owner of the property. The purpose for that was to provide a real estate tax exemption to Clayton. And because that agreement contemplated the city taking title to the property, it was necessary to incorporate the easement, which was previously a standalone easement. It was necessary to incorporate the terms of the easement into the agency agreement. That happened in the year 2000.
And so 2 questions on that one. That was to get the tax credit that's made available under the state statute, correct?
No, that's not correct. The reason for the agency agreement was to get an abatement of real estate taxes. Credits associated with a conservation are for income taxes.
And is that under federal, state, or local?
Well, I believe that there are state tax credits available for conservation easements and federal tax credits available for conservation.
Awesome. And so when you talked a little bit about that replacement, why was council not involved in that change?
I wasn't here in the year 2000. I think council was involved in that change. Council approved the agency agreement, which was the document that gave effect to the change. So I think council was fully aware of and approved the agency agreement in the year 2000.
So in the settlement agreement, when it talks about a mutual, the potential for a change or removal of the easement with mutual agreement, is that a guarantee that it must come through city council? It can't bypass city council to change the easement or lift the easement?
Well, I think to answer your question, the easement is a real estate interest that is owned by the city. And as a real estate interest, under our charter, section 3.2.6, a material modification or release or sale of a real estate interest requires city council approval. So city council approval would be required to change or release the easement.
Awesome. Now, can you explain to us how Denver was in this lawsuit and why we settled and how much we settled for and what the settlement allows?
Well, the initial lawsuit was brought by Arcis, who was a golf course operator and had a lease as a golf course operator with Clayton, who was the owner of the property. In 2017, the city was in discussions with Clayton about purchasing the property. That agreement never went forward, but the golf course operator claimed that Clayton had violated their rights under their lease and brought suit against Clayton. We were not a party to that lawsuit originally. And then in 2018, as the city was moving forward with our P2P project, we decided that we could no longer wait for that litigation to be resolved and moved forward with the acquisition of 25 acres for a permanent easement on the property. Clayton was the owner. They were supportive of our land use acquisition or land use ordinance at the time. And so the lawsuit was really around what the value, what the cost of the city's acquisition of that land was going to be, what the city needed to pay the landowner. Subsequently, Clayton sold the property to Westside. Westside stepped into the shoes of Clayton on the land valuation, and the city entered into negotiations then with Westside to pay for the easement. And then we executed a settlement agreement that resolved the litigation, resolved the condemnation action, and we agreed to pay $6 million to Westside for the value of the real estate, which includes the restoration of the golf course eventually in the future.
So with the settlement that we paid out to them, they essentially got the full 155 acres for 18 million? Or how much did the acreage end up being at the end of both of these transactions?
My understanding is that Westside paid Clayton $24 million for 155 acres. That included the right to receive $6 million from the city. So if you do the math there, you get to $18 million. Remember, however, that included in that $6 million paid by the city is the cost eventually, if required, to restore the golf course.
And in any other situation where there's a conservation easement, would there be a LDR process allowed prior to lifting the easement?
I don't know. This is such a unique circumstance. I'm not aware of any other situation. And in fact, my understanding is there is no other example of the city owning a conservation easement on property within the city. So we're kind of into uncharted territory here.
Thank you. Can I get Kenneth Ho?
Sure, we've got Kenneth on the line. Just need to have him unmute. Go ahead, Councilwoman.
Okay, Kenneth, can you tell me a little bit about Westside and your makeup, your racial makeup of your principals? How many are there?
Good evening, Councilwoman CdeBaca. I actually don't know the racial makeup of my colleagues. I haven't asked them specifically. But I am a Chinese American. I'm a first generation Chinese American. My parents immigrated to this country.
So are there 7 of you total?
I believe there are believe there are 6 of us.
Are there any other non-white individuals on your principal team besides yourself?
On our principal team, no.
So can you tell me a little bit about how close the northern edge of this property is to the I-70 highway?
The northern edge of this property, I believe it ends at 40th on its eastern side, and then Smith Road. I'm sorry, 40th on its western side, and Smith Road on its eastern side. I don't know the specific distance to I-70 from those distances.
What is your awareness of the health impacts of having properties near a highway?
I guess it's a pretty vague question. I know that generally speaking, highways can contribute to worse air quality around it because of internal combustion engines and those sorts of things, and that there's a lot of historic reasons for how interstates have been located, and there are a number of social justice issues and environmental justice issues associated with that.
And what is your awareness of the deficiency of the tree canopy in the zip code this is located in?
My understanding is that the tree canopy is deficient in the zip code that it's identified in, and that's that there also is, per the game plan document that the city adopted, there's also a parks deficiency in the northern area around this as well, defined by a 10-minute walk radius. And I think that that's part of the false narrative here, that it can either only be one thing or another. I think we can address
Kenneth, we have some limited time here. We have limited time, so I'm going to just get to the rest of my questions.
And Councilwoman, I wanted to also chime in here, because we do have the motion to re-refer, and if that fails, we still have this on the floor for publication. So if one more question, and then I know I've got quite a few of our colleagues up in the queue as well.
Can you bring on Penfield Tate?
We've got Penfield on.
Mr. Tate, can you talk to us a little bit about how this initiative got started and how it came to this space of potentially being referred by council rather than a citizen-led initiative?
Yes, Councilwoman and members of City Council, thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening. Councilwoman, it started, and the intent was to have a citizen-initiated measure. But quite frankly, with the advent of COVID and a number of other things, our members on SOS Denver didn't feel comfortable going door to door, standing in parking lots during a pandemic, asking people to sign petitions. And when we saw that council was in the process of considering proposals, we approached you and asked you if you'd consider carrying this for us. But prior to doing that, and I have to state this because it goes to a question that Councilman Herndon raised that I think the city attorney's office has answered. The language was submitted to the city council, I'm sorry, to the city attorney's office, and we went through 3 iterations of drafting before you have the language before you now. And we were advised that it met all the legal requirements, including single subject. So if there's any question about whether this measure complies with the single subject requirement, something's happened terribly wrong in terms of our working with and having to vet this through the city attorney's office.
Correct. Thank you, Penfield. And I just want to, really point out that this is the largest parcel sold in recent years, and it is the quintessential sweetheart deal. They totaled $18 million for 155 acres of land. Just down the street, you have a smaller parcel, a 30-acre parcel that sold almost 3 times higher. You have a 13-acre parcel a little bit further down that sold for $86 million. This is not even 2 miles away from this parcel. And so what this developer received for $18 million is worth well over $1 billion. There's no other piece of land in the city that is close to transit in the way that this is, that is close to the city. It's very important for us to recognize, especially if we want to talk about race. I wish we would have had the same passion about race last week, but this is one of the last pockets of Denver that has a substantial Black community left. And this Black community is predominantly made up of our Black elders who are homeowners, who have repeatedly called us and asked us for help with rising property values and consequently rising property taxes. They are being pushed out as the neighborhood is right now. That is without parcels being sliced up and sold off at market rate. And so if we want to protect the Black community, if we want to protect the brown community, we need to, one, not only take into the consideration the health impacts of building affordable housing next to a highway. That was our challenge with I-70, but also the impacts of lifting this conservation easement to sell parcels off at market rate. The conservation easement is what protects the values from skyrocketing even further in this area because of the way that we do market value assessments of property values in the state of Colorado. And so I appreciate all of the questions, all of the interest in protecting this community. The intent behind this was to make sure that community stakeholders had a decision-making vote in what happens to their neighborhood. I point blank asked the developers of this property if they would be willing to enter into an agreement that they would need 51% of homeowners' approval or sign off on a petition for any development in this area to ensure we were giving neighbors real decision-making power. And they refused to give the neighborhood that kind of power. And so while we're hearing a lot about community input, I've been through enough processes, community stakeholder processes, to know that input is not sufficient. People need to have decision-making power over what's happening in their neighborhoods. And a vote, even if it has to go citywide, is the only way we can get that to them, then I think that we should be considerate of that. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a situation where we push out the last communities of color left in Denver. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam President. I think Councilwoman CdeBaca makes a really good point here. And I think that there's, something else that we talked about a couple of weeks ago during our conversation around, our lens conversation around where we really want to go with our priorities as a council. And one of the things that we identified in our last bullet point was to make sure that we were paying attention to climate change and the environment. June and July were among the hottest on record in Denver ever recorded. August, I think, is one of the top, or maybe it's 2020 as a year total, is one of the top 5 ever. There are more 90-degree days now than ever before. This is 155 acres of land, and we have to keep that in mind. This is undeveloped land. This is, if it's gone, it's never coming back. And, one of the things we are talking about as we're looking at, the East Area Plan, Councilman Herndon and I are doing, as we're looking at a residential infill project that is coming, as we're looking at group living coming, we cannot look at these things in silos. We cannot have these conversations in silos. And if we are going to start talking about having a residential infill project where the proposal on the table is going to be to start splitting single family lots into potentially multi-family lots, if we are going to be adding more and more, potentially more and more people into homes, if we are going to be making all of these incremental changes to our community, then we have to have the open space too. And we don't have that anymore. And we are losing it day by day by day. And we have to have that conversation too. And we're not. So if this is one of the last parcels and the only other parcels that CPD can point us to that still exist in the city and county of Denver are out on lining Pena Boulevard up to the airport as the undeveloped tracts of land in our city that remain, and the people of the city and county of Denver are saying, we want to have a say because we want to, because this matters to all of us as a city, because this is it for us. And once it's gone, it's never coming back. I think that we need to keep that in mind. I think that's incredibly important for us to keep in mind. This isn't just about the people of one neighborhood. Yes, it is. And yes, we need to keep that in mind, but we also need to keep in mind that it is about our entire city that has given away and developed so much land at this point that we are falling way behind on green space per person. And that is incredibly important. And we are paying for it in record climate change and record fires all over this state, air quality that is awful. And our kids and our kids' kids are going to pay for that for the rest of their lives. So if the people of our city are saying, stop, we want to have a say in this because this is not okay with us, I think as council members, we need to listen to that. We need to respect that voice too. So I am going to vote to refer this to the people because I think that that's incredibly important and something we haven't addressed yet. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sawyer. Councilwoman Torres.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm incredibly concerned about the timing that's presented in the language and when it gives the people of Denver an option to weigh in. And I find it problematic that we're talking big picture about our value of open space, our value of the neighborhood, of the community to weigh in, when City Council would have to make the two decisions that it needs to make before it even goes to the ballot for the public to weigh in on those, because the language in the measure refers specifically to commercial and residential development. So that has to be ready to go before the people can weigh in on that. And it's after we've already made the two decisions. And I find that a problematic factor because most people are advocating to us as council members that they want to have a vote or a say before. And whether I agree with that or not, we can't refer this if it's actually placing that vote after we've already made those decisions as the council well into the future. I will support it going back to committee, but I will also say, I also don't have any interest in lifting this easement absent the 51% that Councilwoman CdeBaca mentioned in terms of neighborhood homeowner votes about what happens on this property. This is their business. This is their community. And without that, I don't have any interest in lifting it either. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me just first say that when I chaired the committee that this item came to for discussion, we did have a couple of people on both sides that spoke. But what we did was we voted to move it on to the Finance and Governance Committee, which was the referring committee to then move it to the floor of council. And then obviously our action then moves it on to the ballot, to the clerk's office to place on the November ballot. So there were continued to be some questions. This has changed a little bit, but I think the issue for me is I also would not move to lift the conservation easement I was around when this was put on the property, and it was put on there to try to protect the open space. And so I won't get into all the details of all of that. We have over 500 acres of land that's going to be developed in our city, and that land is going to require open space as part of those developments. One of the changes that happened over time was we used to require 10% of the entire land, and now we only require 10% of the developable land. So we take out the roads, we take out, you know, the street, I mean, the, you know, curb gutter sidewalks, any of the drainage, some of that kind of stuff is taken out. In some cases, we actually allow drainage to be counted as parkland. So I think that's a different policy discussion that we should be having about what are we requiring as we see the growth happening and the demand for more open space in our city. I personally do not believe that we currently have any threat to what happens on this site right now, because it does require action by council to deal with the conservation easement and also to deal with voting on any zoning changes for the site. So I think, given the fact that we have spent now a good part of our council night having the discussion we should have had on the floor, I mean, at the committee instead of on the floor, I think we want to be crystal clear about what it is we're asking the voters to approve. And, you know, in the meantime, I guess those conversations can continue, but that can't happen without council's action in terms of anything different happening with the property, with the land. So I'm going to vote to move it back to committee so we could have that conversation. If we wanted to bring this language or different language to the ballot next year, we can still do that. So I just think that it's important that the residents in the neighborhood have the opportunity to come forward in much larger numbers than what we saw. Again, there were like 3 or 4 people that came and spoke at the one meeting that we had. And I think this warrants, you know, broader input from that community being able to weigh in before we move on something that will be locked into the charter. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam
Thank you,
President.
Councilwoman Ortega. Councilwoman Sandoval, you're back up.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question before I make a comment. Can John McGrath come back on?
Mm-hmm. John, we can get John back in, and just want to make sure folks are tracking here. We have on the floor Council Bill 851, and we are right now considering a motion to re-refer it to committee.
Hey, John, how far into the no action are we? I can't remember how many months we are. How much time do we have left on the no action?
I'm looking that up. I think that the settlement agreement was entered into in October or so of last year. No, it was November 4th. So we're a little bit less than a year into the 3-year period.
And so the 3-year period, just so we're all clear on the no action, it ends what date according to the settlement?
I believe it's November 4th, 2022.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
So one point of clarification, Madam President, in the motion that's on the floor, it was mentioned to go back to Ludi instead of FinGov, even though it would be a ballot measure. So I just want to go on the record that said, if it does go to Ludi or FinGov, wherever this ends up, that we have a robust public comment on this part. So if it's Ludi, I would, as the vice chair of Ludi, I would ask that I go on the record to make sure that we have that. And I was confused by why it would go to Ludi instead of FinGov. So before I vote, I'm referring it back. Does it matter in the motion which committee it goes to? Like, are we that specific, or are we just referring it back to committee? Sorry, just clarification.
Mm-hmm. It will be referred back to committee. We didn't specify which committee it would go to, but I know I see Councilman Flynn and Councilman Herndon up in the queue, and so we don't need to clarify which committee. It doesn't matter for the motion.
Okay, it's just to make the motion going back to committee.
That it would go back to committee.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you. That was super confusing. I heard Ludi in the motion, so I was confused by that. So to Councilwoman CdeBaca's point about getting 51% of the property owners, I think that's a valid point. I think that when you do a petition protest in our charter, we have the ability to have a petition protest for rezonings, and you have to get 20% of the landowners and their name exactly matching on title. And it has worked in several instances in Council District 1 to show what the community wants. And when I was working for Councilman Espinosa, he worked on a notification so that everybody within 200 feet of the property that was getting rezoned in that same area of the petition protest would get a letter, a notification in the mail. Because what I've noticed through land use, and I love zoning, like all of you on this on council know that I love zoning, it's not equitable. When you are working full time and you have other jobs and you have kids and you have things, you are not paying attention to the planning process. And even the planning process, I do not believe has always been equitable. When I was working in Council District 9, we had to work extra hard to make sure that the unheard voices in Global, Larry, and Swansea were at the table for the planning initiative. So it's usually these planning initiatives are in the evening. So if you have kids, you can't go. It's really challenging. So for Councilwoman CdeBaca to have asked the property owner point blank if they would like 51%, I don't understand why that's so hard. If you're getting the community input that you say you are from the people who would be impacted, I do not think that that's a challenge. So I want to go on the record saying that I absolutely support that Councilman CdeBaca, that I think that most initiatives should be like this. I wish we required more participation from those most impacted, because it's usually rezonings go through. If you miss the sign, you don't know what's going on. If you miss the notification in the mail, you don't know what's going on. And then you don't really know what's going on until development happens. And that happens all the time in Council District 1, where zoning has changed and then people call me, or it's a use by right and we don't have any input. And for this, we have a lot of input. And I will also go on the record saying that I am not interested in taking away this conservation easement at all. I will publicly go on the record and say that I think it was put in for a purpose. Now, do I want to amend it and see other things that would like to take place on this property? Absolutely. Taking it away when taxpayers had tax dollars were used to have it, and it was a vote, citywide vote, just does not make sense to me. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Madam President. I wanted to chime in when Councilwoman Sandoval was asking about committee assignments, totally within the discretion of the council president as to where to assign it. And Councilwoman Sandoval, I think it makes absolutely perfect sense to have a discussion in LUDI, land use, transportation, infrastructure, for those who are acronym challenged, to have that discussion there, have the public in, let's talk about it. But then when it's referred, if it's referred then to an election, it should go through FinGov just to have that hearing there and then come to the council. But completely within the discretion of the president. I think the discussion that we've had here, Madam President, demonstrates more than adequately why this needs to go back to committee. Every member of council has had to ask clarifying questions. There's confusion about it, including the sponsor of this bill, to get clarification on what it means and how it will work. And this isn't really a good way to make changes to our city charter. So I see that some other folks are up in the queue, and I was going to call the question because this is just referral. But Madam President, that's your discretion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman. We've only got a couple more up, and then I'd like to have the opportunity to say my piece as well, and then we'll vote. Councilman Herndon?
Thank you, Madam President. And I was just going to echo Councilman Flynn. I appreciate all the thoughtful questions my colleagues have asked, and I should have looked at my watch to see when this started, but I feel comfortable saying we've been having this conversation over a good hour, and I think it's just, and that doesn't even include the opportunity for community members to weigh in, and that's why I originally was of the notion we should just vote this down, but I am supportive of sending it to committee, and as long as whichever committee it goes to allows the opportunity. Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval, for mentioning the robust community conversation. I'll be supportive. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman Herndon. Councilwoman CdeBaca, you're back up on comments, and then I'll go.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't know if Mr. McGrath can actually tell us what the legality is of requiring the 51%. Since we have this executed settlement agreement that acknowledges their intention to build something else there, but really doesn't require any kind of decision-making authority in the neighborhood. What is the legality of requiring that, and where would that happen?
Mr. McGrath, go ahead, and then that will be the last question because it's not really related to this motion to re-refer, but go ahead and answer this one.
Yeah, thank you again, John McGrath, City Attorney's Office. Quite honestly, I'd have to research that. I can't tell you off the top whether or how the city would impose a requirement outside of the requirements of the code itself. So I would have to consider the question and get back to you.
Well, the converse of that, since the land use process is not a typical process that would be guaranteed for someone lifting a conservation easement, and it's a part of the settlement, does the 20% petition rule apply in this land use process?
I would assume it would apply, but would have to confirm that.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for your patience. I think it's important for the public to also see our deliberations and the time and intention that council members have put into this conversation, and it's not as easy as a nay or an aye, that we are really considering what we're voting on and the implications of it. And I am in support of it being re-referred back to committee. You know, the large swaths of land that we have along the Tower Road corridor, I would not feel comfortable having the entire city and county of Denver vote on the usage of that land when it really would most directly affect the residents and constituents in that council district. And they deserve to have robust community engagement to weigh in and make sure their voices are heard through this entire process. And so with that, Madam Secretary, roll call on the re-referral.
Herndon.
Aye.
Hinds.
Aye.
Kashmann.
Aye.
Kneich.
Nay.
Ortega.
Aye.
Sandoval.
Aye.
Sawyer.
Nay.
Torres.
Aye.
Black.
Aye.
CdeBaca.
No.
Clark.
Aye.
Flynn.
Aye.
Madam President.
Aye. Madam Secretary, close the voting and announce the results.
3 nays, 10 ayes.
10 ayes. Council Bill 20-0851 has been re-referred to committee.